The windstorm dropped a full-grown maple across the shared driveway a little after 11 in the morning, right down the seam between my half of the concrete and my stuck-up neighbors, and I was the only person on Cedar Court awake to hear it come down. I heard the whole thing, which almost nobody does. Most people sleep through the tree that changes their year. But I work nights. Industrial electrician, graveyard shift out at the Fenwick cold storage plant, 12 years running the same panels and conduit while the rest of the county dreams. And by 11 in the morning, I'm the one man on a street full of commuters and daycares who's home, awake, and drinking his first coffee at what everybody else calls lunch. So when the wind that had been leaning on the neighborhood all morning finally found the rot in that maple, I was standing at my kitchen window watching it happen, and I heard the crack before I saw the fall. It's a sound like the world clearing its throat. Then a green weight came down across the driveway with a wet final thud, and every porch light on Cedar Court that had been burning against the storm-dark noon went out at once. I am Dean Halverson, 36 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life being the person who notices when the lights go out. I stood there a second and took inventory the way you do. The maple had come down at an angle, roots half lifted out of the strip of grass between the two units, its trunk laid clean across the concrete we shared, and the top branches had caught the service drop, the wire that fed both my side and hers off the same pole, and torn it down with them. So we were both dark, me and the woman on the other side of the common wall who the entire cul-de-sac had decided, by unanimous unspoken vote, was stuck up. Her name was Meredith Cole. The street called her Meredith when it was being polite and worse when it wasn't. I'd lived beside her for a year and a half and knew about 6 things about her, all of them secondhand: that she was a widow, that she had a quiet kid, that her curtains were always half-drawn, and that she'd never once come to a block party, a driveway happy hour, or the 4th of July thing where Ron Passer sets off mortars he is not legally allowed to own. The consensus was that she thought she was better than us. I'd never seen any evidence of that. I'd mostly seen a woman leave for work at 7 and come home at 6 with her chin set like she was walking into weather, even on the clear days, and a little boy who watched the street from the front window the way I watch a panel I don't trust yet. I pulled on my boots and went out into the rain to look at the tree, because that is what I do. I don't call people first. I look at the thing. That's when I heard the generator. It was coming from behind her unit, from the little concrete pad by her back gate, and it was making a noise no generator should ever make. Not the flat drone of a machine doing its job, but a stuttering, arcing snap, snap, snap under the motor, and every 3rd or 4th snap there was a flash of blue-white light against her back fence that I felt in my back teeth before I'd even placed it. I have spent 12 years around 3-phase power that could stop your heart between 2 heartbeats. I know the color of a thing that's about to go very wrong. I went through the gap in the fence without thinking about whether I was allowed to. She had a portable generator running on the pad, a decent one, better than most people on that street would have bought, and somebody had wired it into her house through a homemade setup that made the hair on my arms stand up just looking at it. No transfer switch, no ground rod. A suicide cord plugged into her dryer outlet, backfeeding the whole panel, and the neutral floating loose off a lug that had shaken itself half out with the vibration, which was what was arcing. A loose connection carrying a house's worth of current, sparking against the metal frame every time the motor surged. It was the kind of thing that burns a house down at 2 in the morning with everyone asleep inside it. It was the kind of thing that puts a kid's picture on the news. I killed it, reached in, hit the motor switch, and the snapping stopped, and the blue light died, and the only sound left was the rain on the fence and my own pulse. The back door opened. Meredith Cole came out onto her step in a raincoat thrown over work clothes, and she looked at me standing over her dead generator with a face I would come to know very well over the following months. The face of a woman braced for the next thing to be about how she'd failed. "It was working," she said. Flat. "Not thank you. Not what are you doing in my yard." Just a small defense of the last thing she'd been able to do herself. "It was about to work exactly once more," I said, "and then you'd have had a fire instead of a fridge." I crouched and pointed at the lug without touching it. "This connection's loose and it's arcing. That flashing you were seeing, that's your neutral trying to leave. Whoever set this up backfed your panel off a dryer plug with no ground." If the power company had come back on with this cord still in, it would have sent your generator's power straight up the line and killed whatever lineman was up the pole fixing our tree. She was quiet for a second. Behind her in the doorway, a small face had appeared. The boy, maybe 9, in a hoodie, holding a plastic screwdriver in one hand, like it was a thing you'd want to have in an emergency. "I paid a man to install it," she said finally. "You paid a man to sell you a story," I said. "Different service." I didn't say it unkindly. I've learned there's a way to tell somebody bad news about their wiring that doesn't also tell them they're stupid, and I've spent a career getting it wrong and then getting it right. She heard the difference, I think. Her shoulders came down about a quarter inch. "Can it be fixed?" she said. Still not quite a question. She was a woman who had clearly learned not to ask for things out loud where they could be denied to her in front of a witness. "It can be grounded and switched over safe in about an hour. If you've got the parts, which you don't," I said. "I've got the parts. I do this for a living. I can't ask you to—" "You didn't," I said, and picked up the generator to move it out of the puddle it was sitting in. Nobody asked me anything. I heard a machine dying and I came and looked. "Go back inside where it's dry. I'll knock when it's safe." I want to be honest about my own motives here, because the story people tell about me later got generous, and I don't deserve the generous version. I didn't cross into that yard because I'm a good man. I crossed because a bad connection offends me on a level below, thought, the way a crooked picture frame offends some people, and because I had a whole rainy day and no one to spend it on. That's the true shape of it. I'd been divorced 2 years by then, no villain in it, which I know is the kind of thing men say when there was a villain and it was them, but in my case it was just true. Kara wanted the suburbs to be a rung. A starter place, she called it, a step you stood on while you climbed to the next step, which was going to be a bigger place in Portland with a view of something. I wanted the suburbs to be the top of the stairs. I wanted Cedar Court to be where we were, not where we were passing through, and I couldn't make her want to arrive somewhere she only ever saw as a place to leave. So she left it, and me, in one clean motion 2 Aprils back, and drove to Bend, and I stayed in a duplex with a woman-shaped absence in it, and a lot of daytime to fill. Not bitter. Just tired, in the specific way a man gets when he keeps a nice house that nobody comes home to and finds himself, more and more, talking to the house instead. I talk to houses. I always have. I tell a panel it's all right, I'm going to figure out what's wrong with you. I've never once said a sentence that fluent to a person I was actually related to. So I fixed her generator, drove a proper ground rod down into the wet strip of grass by her pad, wired in a real transfer switch I had in a bin in my garage from a job that fell through, landed her neutral on a lug that would hold, and had her fridge and her furnace and 3 circuits of her lights back inside of an hour while the tree still lay across our driveway and the linemen were still 2 neighborhoods over. I didn't narrate it. I've noticed that people who don't trust easy don't want commentary. They want the thing done and the quiet left intact. So I did it quiet. When I was finishing up, the boy came out and stood a careful 8 feet away and watched me torque the last lug, holding his plastic screwdriver, and after a while he said, "Is it going to spark again?" "No," I said. "It's grounded now. When it's grounded, the extra electricity has somewhere polite to go instead of jumping around looking for a way out." He thought about that. "Like a door," he said. "Exactly like a door," I said, and something in my chest did a small, unfamiliar thing, because it had been a long time since anybody in my life had understood a thing I said on the first try. "What's your name?" "Milo," he said. "I'm Dean. That a full tool set?" He held up the plastic screwdriver like a badge. "I have a drill and a level, too. The level has a bubble, but it's painted on." "Painted on bubble's still a bubble," I said. "You want to hold the light?" He wanted to hold the light. He held it about 40 degrees off from where I needed it the entire time, and I fixed a woman's electrical service by the wandering beam of a 9-year-old, and it was, I realized somewhere in there, the best afternoon I'd had in 2 years. The Cedar Court group chat is a thing I got added to against my will the week I moved in and have never figured out how to leave. It is administered, I use that word on purpose, by Deb Marchetti at number 6, who treats the shared driveway sightlines of a 9-house cul-de-sac the way an air traffic controller treats a runway. The chat is mostly package alerts, coyote sightings, and Deb reminding everyone about the bylaws regarding trash cans, which she has memorized the way some men memorize scripture. And that afternoon, while the tree, still lay across the driveway and I was coiling up my extension cord in the rain, my phone started going off in my pocket with the particular rhythm of a chat that has found a subject. I read it standing under her carport, where I'd stepped to get out of the worst of the rain. It went about how you'd expect. Deb had posted. Power company says the whole court is out till this evening. Tree took the drop line. Anyone need anything from town? Fine. Neighborly. Then Ron Passer, who I have watched nearly detonate his own thumb, wrote, Saw somebody's got a Jenny running over at the coal place. Guess the Ice Queen finally let a man near the house LOL. And then it went the way those things go. Quick, a little pile of them, each one funnier to the last person than to anyone actually involved. Somebody said, "'Bout time she thawed." Somebody said, 18 months and she's never once said hi to me, but she'll take the help now, huh? Somebody, and this is the one that got me, posted a laughing emoji and, finally letting a man in, must be the end of days. Deb herself, who I will say did not start it, added a single now that managed to keep it going while pretending to stop it. I stood there under Meredith Cole's carport, dripping, and I thought about the loose neutral I'd found arcing 8 feet from where a 9-year-old slept, and I thought about how none of these people had been awake at 11 that morning, and how none of them had ever walked into her yard, and how easy it is to decide a person is stuck up when the actual explanation is that she's exhausted and scared and doesn't have one spare ounce of anything left over to spend being charming at a driveway happy hour. I'm not a man who says much in that chat. I think I'd posted twice in a year, both times to say I'd found somebody's cat. But I typed with my cold thumbs, slow, and I sent. Nobody let anybody in. I heard her generator arcing and I shut it off before it burned the block down. It was wired to backfeed the pole. That's a dead lineman waiting to happen, not a gossip item. I regrounded it. For what it's worth, her setup's grounded better than half the houses on this street now, including yours, Ron. You're all welcome to have me look at yours too. The chat went quiet for about 4 minutes, which in Cedar Court terms is a national moment of silence. Then Deb posted a thumbs up, and Ron posted, "Good looking out, man." And the subject changed to whether the tree removal would come out of the HOA reserve, and Meredith Cole went back to being a woman nobody thought about until the next time she was convenient to think about. But I looked up from my phone, and she was standing in her back doorway with her own phone in her hand, and I understood from her face that she was on that chat too. That she'd been on it the whole 18 months. That she had read every single one of those little laughing jokes about herself, in real time, alone, in a dark house, and had never once typed back a word in her own defense, because defending yourself in a room like that only ever tells them they got you. She'd read what I wrote too. I watched her read it. She didn't smile. I would learn that Meredith Cole did not spend smiles the way other people did, that a smile from her was a thing you earned like a certification. But something moved across her face that was too complicated to be gratitude and too warm to be nothing. She put the phone in her coat pocket. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "I didn't do it for you. Ron's got a hot tub wired by the same genius who did your generator. I've been wanting an excuse to condemn it for a year." That got the smallest possible sound out of her. Not a laugh. The ghost of the place a laugh comes from. By evening, the power company had the tree off the drop line but not off the driveway. That was going to be a chainsaw and a Saturday, and the HOA was already arguing about whose Saturday. The lights came back on up and down the court, porch by porch, and the neighborhood exhaled and forgot the whole thing had happened. But the maples still lay across the concrete between our 2 units, a green wall 4 feet high, so that for the first time in 18 months, Meredith Cole and I could not get to our cars without walking past each other, and there is nothing like a fallen tree between 2 people to make them, briefly, into a we. She came out that evening while I was looking at the trunk, figuring how we'd cut it. She had 2 mugs. She held one out to me without a word, and I took it, and that was the first of the tailgate mugs. Though we didn't have a tailgate yet, that came later. Her mug, the one she kept, was thin white china with a hairline crack running up the side and a faded ring of blue cornflowers around the rim, the kind of mug that comes as one of a set that somebody special picked out, and I clocked it as belonging to a life she didn't talk about. The one she handed me was a plain heavy diner mug, chipped at the base, the spare mug, the guest mug. The mug a careful person keeps for the plumber. I didn't mind being the plumber. I've been the plumber my whole life. We drank her coffee standing on either side of a fallen tree in the rain, and neither of us said much, which was fine, because I don't need a person to talk, and she'd clearly spent 18 months relieved that nobody made her. After a while, she looked at the cut end of the trunk where the wind had snapped it, at the pale, wet wood, and she said, "Quiet," not looking at me, like she was confessing something she'd regret. "Don't tell the cul-de-sac, but you're the only one on this street who doesn't stare." I thought about that for a second. "Stare at what?" I said. "At me," she said. "Waiting. They've all been waiting a year and a half to see how I'm doing. Every one of them, at the mailbox, at the school pickup. How are you holding up? Meredith, how's Milo? If you ever need anything, with this look, like they're checking to see if I've cracked yet so they can be the one who saw it." She turned the cracked mug in her hands. "You just came and shut off the thing that was going to hurt us, and told me my neutral was floating. You talked to me like I was a house." "I talk to houses better than I talk to people," I said. "It's not a compliment, it's a diagnosis." "It's the nicest thing anybody's done for me since the funeral," she said, and then looked immediately like she wished she hadn't said the word, and went back inside, and left me standing there holding a chipped diner mug in the rain, understanding for the first time that the woman the whole street called cold was not cold at all. She was just standing very still, the way you stand still when you're the only thing holding a load, and can't set it down, and can't let anyone see your arms shake. I cut the tree up myself the next Saturday, which was not my job and not the HOA's plan, but the HOA's plan involved a bid process in 3 weeks, and I had a chainsaw and a Saturday, and a growing objection to the two of us climbing over a maple to reach our own cars. I started at the crown and worked back toward the roots, and about an hour in, Milo came out in a rain slicker, 2 sizes too big, and stood at the safe distance I'd taught him without being taught and watched, plastic tool set on the wet driveway beside him, laid out in a row like a real tradesman's roll. The screwdriver, the ratcheting drill that made a sound like a card in bicycle spokes, and the level with the painted-on bubble. "Your mom know you're out here?" I said between cuts. "She's studying," he said. I didn't think anything of it at the time. It's a word. Kids say it. I filed it under nothing and kept cutting. By afternoon, the maple was firewood, stacked against the fence except for the stump. The base of the trunk cut low and flat, still rooted in the strip of grass between our units, a pale raw disc about the size of a card table. I meant to grind it out. I stood over it with the intention of renting a stump grinder, and then Milo climbed up and sat on it, cross-legged, and set his plastic level on his knee and told me it was level, and I looked at a widow's kid sitting on a stump like it was a throne, and I decided the stump could stay a while. I told myself it was because grinders are expensive to rent. That was not the reason. I did not yet know the reason. The reason was that some part of me had already decided that the place where the tree fell was not going to be a scar. It was going to be furniture. That's how the slow part started. And I want to describe it right, because the slow part is the part that mattered, and it did not look like anything from the outside. It looked like a man with too much free daylight, finding reasons to be useful 2 doors down. Her kitchen light flickered. I noticed it through the window one evening, the way I notice everything electrical. A small stutter in the fixture over her sink, there and gone, the visual equivalent of a cough that means something. I mentioned it. She said it had done that for a year, and she'd stopped seeing it. I said a light that flickers is a house trying to tell you something, and you should let it finish the sentence. She let me in. Her wiring was a horror, not her fault. The whole duplex had been built in 1978 by a contractor who bought aluminum wire because it was cheap that year, and aluminum loosens and finds its way to warm eventually, and half her outlets were the original devices, browned at the screws, one of them warm to the touch behind the plate, which is a sentence I will never enjoy writing about a room where a child charges a tablet. So I started coming over after my shifts. Instead of talking to my own empty house, I'd walk over with a bag of copper pigtails and proper devices and fix one thing. Never a project. Never I'll do your whole house. Just this outlet today. This junction box today. This flickering fixture, which turned out to be a backstabbed connection 30 years slack, and which I made stop flickering in about 11 minutes. And when it burned steady, she stood under it and looked up at the light like it had personally forgiven her for something. "Huh," she said. "Huh," I agreed. We fell into it without either of us naming it. She'd come home at 6. I'd wander over around then before my night shift, Tools in hand, Milo would appear with his plastic set and I'd give him a real job that wasn't real. Hold this, read me that bubble, tell me if this looks straight to you. And he'd do it with the gravity of a man being paid by the hour. And when the light was fading and I had to leave for the plant, Meredith would walk me out to the driveway, and one of those evenings, she brought the two mugs out to the tailgate of my truck, which I'd started backing into the shared drive so we had somewhere to set things down. And after that, the tailgate was just where we had our coffee. Her cornflower mug with the crack, my chip diner mug, never matched, never would, and I came to like that they didn't. Matched mugs are for people who bought their life all at once. Ours came from two different wrecks. I learned things in inches. That her husband's name had been Paul. That Paul had been a high school science teacher, patient, funny, the kind of man who explained thunder to a scared 4-year-old by having him count Mississippi. That Paul had gotten sick, she said it that way, got sick, the phrase you use when the real word is too heavy to lift at a tailgate, 3 years back, and had died 2 years back, and that Milo had been 7, and that she had done every single thing since alone, the mortgage and the grief and the science homework, she wasn't as good at as Paul had been, alone in a house on a street full of people who watched her do it and called her cold for not making it prettier. I didn't push. You don't push a person who's carrying something. You just walk at their pace and take the light stuff when they'll let you. There was one drive. I want to put it in because it's the one that told me the truth about myself before I was ready to hear it. Her kitchen needed an old work box and a length of a particular armored cable that the modern stuff doesn't quite match, and I knew a salvage yard. Delgado's out past the county line, 40 minutes of two-lane through the wet cedar country, a boneyard of torn-out fixtures and reclaimed lumber, and a barn full of old house guts. I could have ordered the box online for $4. I did not order the box online. I told her I had to drive out to Delgado's for the right part, and she should come because it was worth seeing, which was true, and because I wanted 40 minutes of her in the passenger seat of my truck, which was also true and which I did not say. It rained the whole way, the good Oregon kind, the kind that isn't weather so much as climate, a steady gray that turns the cedars black and the road to a ribbon of reflected sky. We brought the mugs. She held both in her lap over the county line because the cup holders in my truck haven't worked since Kara and I bought it. And she didn't ask why a man keeps a truck with broken cup holders for 8 years, which I appreciated, because the answer is stupid and true. Because it still runs, and I don't leave things that still run. At Delgado's, she came alive in a way I hadn't seen. She walked the aisles of ripped-out cabinet doors and mismatched hinges and stacks of old-growth fur, and she touched things, ran her hand along a reclaimed maple butcher block, stopped dead in front of a wall of old porcelain doorknobs and picked one up and held it to the light like it was a gem. Paul would have, she started and then stopped, and I watched her decide whether she was allowed to finish a sentence with his name in it in front of me, and I said, "Would have what?" in a voice that made it clear the sentence was safe with me, and she finished it. "Would have loved this place." He collected. He was going to build a workbench out of doors. He had a whole plan. She set the doorknob down carefully, in exactly the spot she'd taken it from. I stopped being able to come to places like this. Everything here is somebody's before. It's also somebody's next, I said. That's the whole point of a salvage yard. Nothing here is finished. It's all just between houses. She looked at me for a second, too long, the way she had over the tree stump on the first night, and then she bought the porcelain doorknob, and I bought the box I could have ordered for $4. And we drove home in the rain with the mugs in her lap and did not talk much, and it was the best 40 minutes I'd had since the last best 40 minutes I'd had, which had also been with her. It was on that drive that Deb Marchetti's chat theory got born, though I didn't know it yet. Because somewhere in those weeks the cul-de-sac had noticed something new about Meredith Cole. Not that she'd let a man near the house. They'd decided I was the harmless electrician, the appliance the Ice Queen had finally allowed indoors. No, what they'd noticed was that 2 or 3 weeknights a week, right around 7, Meredith Cole got in her car after work, alone, dressed up a little, and drove off somewhere and came back after dark, and never once said where. And a street that will invent a whole personality for a woman out of the angle of her curtains was not going to leave that alone. Deb got to me at the mailboxes on a Tuesday in that sideways way she has, where the question is wrapped In so much concern you can't call it nosiness without looking like the bad one. You'd know, Dean. You're over there so much, she said, sorting her mail like it was incidental. Does Meredith have a gentleman friend? Somebody was saying she goes out midweek all dressed. And good for her, honestly. It's been long enough. A boy that age, you want to be sure who's you know. I don't know, I said, and neither do you, and I'd leave it there, Deb. Of course, she said, in the voice of a woman who was absolutely not going to leave it there. And she didn't. By that weekend, the theory was fully built out and furnished. Meredith Cole had a secret man, somebody 2 towns over. Married, probably. Why else the secrecy? Why else no name? The same street that had spent 18 months calling her frigid pivoted without a hitch to calling her fast, because the one thing a small town cannot tolerate is a woman whose evenings it can't account for. I didn't believe it. I want that on the record. I'd sat across a tailgate from that woman 24 times and watched her flinch from her own dead husband's name, and the idea that she was slipping off to some man's condo on Tuesdays did not fit the person I'd been quietly, hopelessly, learning by inches. But I'll be honest about the other thing too, the thing under the noble part. It got in, the gossip got in, the way water gets into a wall, invisibly, and does its damage in the dark. Because I had started to want her somewhere on that drive to Delgado's, and want makes a man stupid and jealous about a woman who has never once given him the right to be either. So I did a thing I'm not proud of. I started watching for a car. Here is how I found out the truth, and it wasn't clever and it wasn't earned. It was a Wednesday, and I'd told Milo I'd bring back a real bubble level from the plant so he could see how the fake one lied, and I came over around 6:30 with it, and Meredith was already gone, car gone, dressed up and gone, and Milo let me in because he was 9 and I was Dean, and while I was setting the real level next to his plastic one on the kitchen table to show him the difference, I moved a stack of what I thought were Milo's school books to make room. They weren't Milo's school books. They were textbooks. Thick ones, the expensive kind, spines cracked from use. Pharmacology and the nursing process. Medical surgical nursing. Fundamentals of patient care. And spread across the table under them, in a fan a person had clearly been working through and had scooped into a pile when they heard nobody was home to see. Study cards. Index cards. Hundreds of them in a small precise handwriting, a term on one side and its meaning on the other, rubber banded into decks by subject, worn soft at the corners the way a thing gets worn only by a hand that touches it every single day, and clipped to the top of the medical surgical text, a printed schedule, Fenwick Community College. Section 4, NCLEX Review, Tuesdays and Thursdays 6:30 to 9 o'clock at night. I stood in that kitchen holding a 9-year-old's real bubble level and understood the entire thing at once, the way you understand a whole circuit the instant you finally find where the fault is. There was no man. There had never been a man. The dressed-up weeknights, the drives, the locked door, and the she's studying and the cold face at the mailbox that the whole street read as contempt, Meredith Cole was going back to school. She was retaking the nursing boards. She was quietly, in the dark, 2 nights a week after a full day of work and a full night of single motherhood, trying to become the thing she'd been trying to become before her whole life caved in on her. Your mom's a nurse, I said to Milo, carefully testing it. She's going to be, Milo said matter-of-fact, spinning the plastic level so the painted bubble stayed exactly where painted bubbles stay. She was almost 1 before, then Dad got sick and she had to stop. Now she's doing the test again, but you're not supposed to know, because he stopped and looked up at me, and for the first time all those weeks the kid's face had fear in it, the specific fear of a child who's just realized he let out the one thing he'd been trusted to keep in. You're not supposed to know, he said again, smaller. Milo, I said, how come it's a secret? He looked at the study cards. Because last time she failed it, he said, and everybody knew, and she cried in the car and thought I was asleep. She said this time nobody's going to watch. She said if she does it in the dark, then he did the thing kids do where they use a grown-up's exact words without knowing their weight, then if she falls apart again, it's private. And there it was, not a lover. A woman who had failed a test in the worst year of her life, in front of a whole town that had then handed her a nickname for it, and had decided that the only safe way to try again was to make sure no one, not one single soul, knew she was trying at all. She'd rather the cul-de-sac think she had a secret man than know she had a secret hope, because a man they could envy but a hope they could watch her lose. She had built the cold face on purpose. She had let them call her stuck-up because stuck-up was a wall, and behind the wall, undisturbed, a 35-year-old widow was teaching herself pharmacology at a kitchen table after her kid fell asleep. I found out later the rest of it, the part Milo didn't have words for, that the Tuesday nights were the college, but that some of the other nights, the ones she came home from with red eyes she blamed on the drive, were a grief support group in a church basement one town over. Folding chairs and bad coffee where people said their dead person's name out loud once a week so it wouldn't calcify into a word they couldn't lift. She'd been going to both, rebuilding herself in two different basements, in total secret, so the reinvention and the grief could happen where no one who'd known the before could stand around, waiting to see how the after turned out. I should have put the cards down and left. I should have set them exactly where they'd been, the way she'd set the doorknob back at Delgado's, and pretended I never saw, and let her tell me in her own time or never. I didn't get the chance to decide, because she came home early. I heard the car, and then the door, and then Meredith was standing in her own kitchen doorway, looking at a man she'd let in holding her study cards, with her son beside him mid-confession, and I watched the color go out of her face and then come back all at once as something much worse than embarrassment. It was the look of a person who has just watched the one wall she built with her own hands come down in front of the one person she'd started, foolishly, to trust. "Put those down," she said, very quiet, much worse than loud. "Meredith, put them down." And I did, and she crossed the kitchen and gathered the cards herself, quick, scooping them into their decks, with hands that were not quite steady, not looking at me, and she said in a voice sounded flat, "You can go now, Dean. Thank you for the wiring. I think it's all done now. The house. It's all done." "It's not all done. There's still the—" "It's done," she said. She set the real bubble level on the counter and slid it toward me across the tile, returning it, and the small precision of that, giving me back the level so there'd be no reason to come again, hurt worse than anything she could have yelled. "Milo, say goodnight to Mr. Halverson." Milo, stricken, said, "Night, Dean," in a voice that broke my heart a little, and I said goodnight back, and I walked out of the house I'd rewired room by room, past the tailgate, where we'd had our coffee, past the stump I'd left because I'd decided it was going to be furniture, and I heard, behind me, the sound I'd spent 2 months slowly not hearing anymore. I heard her draw the curtains. The next stretch went gray. I know how that sounds. I'm an electrician. I don't traffic in poetry, but there's no other word for what happens to a street when a thing you'd started to count on stops. The coffees stopped. The tailgate stayed empty. I stopped backing my truck into the shared drive because there was no longer anything to set down between us. Her porch light came on at dusk and went off at 11 and told me nothing. I'd get home from the plant at 7 in the morning into the gray light, and I'd look at the 2 mugs on my own kitchen shelf. The chipped diner mug I'd been letting live at my place because it had somehow become mine, and the empty space beside it where a cracked cornflour mug did not sit and never had. And I'd make coffee for one and drink it standing up. Milo still waved at me from the front window sometimes, small, careful, like a boy waving from a country he'd been told he wasn't allowed to visit. That was the worst part. I hadn't just lost the coffees. I'd lost the kid who understood things on the first try, and the plastic tool set laid out in a row, and being for a few good weeks, somebody's idea of the man who shows up. I told myself it was right. She'd asked me to go. A woman who has spent 2 years defending the last inch of her privacy does not owe a lonely electrician a second chance because he liked her coffee. So I let 2 weeks go by being very mature about it, which is a thing I'm good at, being mature at a distance while a thing I want gets colder. I'd done the same clean, reasonable retreat when Kara left. No scene, no fight, just a dignified man helping load a truck. I'm real good at losing things politely. It was Milo, in the end, who wouldn't let me do it politely. He came over on a Thursday, alone, which he wasn't supposed to do, and knocked on my door, actually knocked, this small, solemn person in the too big slicker, and when I opened it, he held up a piece of paper. It was a homework sheet. Long division. "I can't do these," he said, "and Mom's got the test in 9 days and she's studying all the time and I didn't want to bug her." He looked at his shoes. "Dad used to do the math with me." I stood in the doorway with a 9-year-old holding long division up at me like a flag of a country that had run out of everything, and whatever mature, distant thing I'd been doing for 2 weeks came apart in my hands. "Come in," I said. "We'll do the math. But Milo, does your mom know you're here?" "No," he said. Then we do the math fast, I said, and then I walk you home because a man doesn't let a lady worry about where her kid is. That's the first rule. The math's the second rule. We did the math, and then I walked him home in the rain, up the shared driveway, past the stump, and Meredith was already out on the step, coat thrown over her shoulders, phone in her hand, the particular white face of a mother who's just discovered an empty room. When she saw him, she made a sound I won't try to spell, and she came down and got him by the shoulders and did the fast, furious inventory that mothers do, and then she looked up at me, over her son's head in the rain, and I watched her get ready to be angry at me for the sixth thing in a row that wasn't my fault. He came to me for help with his math, I said before she could. I walked him back the second we were done. I wasn't going to keep him. I'd never keep him from you. And then, because I was tired of being mature at a distance, because the rain was coming down steady and warm off the carport roof and I had nothing left to lose that I hadn't already lost. But I'm not sorry he came. That kid misses having somebody in the house who shows up. And so, God help me, do I? She sent Milo inside. She stood under the carport with me in the steady rain, and for a long moment she didn't say anything, and I could see her deciding something, her hand pressed flat against her coat pocket, the way you press a hand to a thing to make sure it's still there. I got a letter, she said finally. She took it out. A folded envelope, soft at the creases from being carried and recarried from the state board, 2 weeks ago, the day you found the cards. She gave a short laugh with no humor in it. It's my acceptance to sit the exam again, the retest. It came in the same mail I walked in on you holding my whole secret in your hands. I've been carrying it in this coat for 2 weeks because I can't decide if it's a permission slip or a setup to fail twice, in writing this time. Why'd you push me out, I said, not accusing, just asking the house what was wrong with it. Because you saw, she said, and her voice finally cracked, right down the middle like her mug, because the whole point was that nobody saw. Dean, I let this entire street think I have nothing. I let them call me cold, I let them call me stuck up. I let Ron Passer's wife feel sorry for me at the school pickup for 18 months, because if they think I have nothing, then no one is standing there watching me want something. And miss. Do you understand? The last time I wanted something out loud, everybody in my life was watching, and I failed it, and my husband was dying while I failed it. And I will never, ever again let people gather around to see whether I can have a thing I reached for. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, angry at herself for the tears. And then you saw the cards, and I looked at your face and I thought, now he knows. Now I'm the sad project. The widow the electrician's rehabbing along with the outlets, and I couldn't stand for that to be what I was to you. So I made you the last thing on the punch list, and I checked you off. The rain came down. Somewhere up the court a porch light was on at noon, or it felt like noon, the way grief makes every hour the same gray hour. I thought about what to say for a while, because I only had one shot and I've watched better men than me waste theirs on the wrong words. I've spent 12 years going into houses at their worst, I said. 2 in the morning, everybody's scared, the power's out, something's arcing in the dark, the family standing around sure the place is done for. And I want to tell you something I know for a fact, that I know better than I know anything. I have watched houses come back from worse than a bad year. I've walked into places that flooded to the joists, that burned to the studs, that a whole street had already written off, and I've stood in them a year later while a kid did his homework at the table, and there was nothing wrong with them anybody could find. Houses don't get thrown out for having a bad year. They get rewired. That's the whole job. I took a breath. You're not a project, Meredith. I've never once in my life fallen for a project. You're a woman studying pharmacology at a kitchen table at midnight after everybody who was supposed to help you left, and that is the least sad thing I have ever seen. It's the bravest. I don't feel sorry for you. I can barely keep my eyes off you. She was very still. Take the test, I said. Sit the exam. And you don't have to do it in the dark anymore because there's a lamp already on. I work nights. My house is lit up and empty from 7 at night till dawn, warm, quiet, nobody to bother you, and I'm not even in it. Study at my table. Bring the cards. Bring the kid. I'll do the long division. You don't have to let the cul-de-sac watch, but let me. Not to see if you fall. To be there with the light on when you don't. She looked at me for the longest time she'd ever looked at me. Over a stump, over a tree, over 18 months of a wall she'd built by hand. You're the only one who doesn't stare, she said, barely above the rain. I'm staring right now, I said. It's different when it's on purpose." And she laughed. A real one, finally, the whole thing, and not the ghost of it. And then she stepped in under the carport out of the last of the rain, and she kissed me, one real kiss, her cold hand flat against my jaw, and the folded letter crushed between us in her other fist, and it tasted like rain and bad church basement coffee and 2 years of nobody, and I have wired a lot of things in my life to carry current, and I have never once felt anything move through me like that did. She studied at my table for the 9 days that were left. She'd come over after Milo was down. She had a baby monitor she set on my counter next to the mugs, which is a detail I still think about. A woman trusting the sound of her sleeping child into my kitchen, and she'd spread the cards out on my table under the good light, and I'd sit across from her with a beer I mostly didn't drink and quiz her when she wanted quizzing and shut up when she didn't. I learned more about the human kidney in 9 nights than a man in my trade has any use for. When she got a run of them right, her whole face changed, opened, and I'd think, there she is, that's the one behind the wall, and I'd have to look back down at the cards so I didn't spook it. The night before the exam, she was too wound to study, so we didn't. I made her come sit on the tailgate instead, and I brought both mugs out, the chipped diner one and her cracked cornflower one, which now lived at my house too, side by side on my shelf, and I filled them, and we sat in the dark shared driveway with the stump between us and my truck, and I didn't say anything encouraging because she'd have hated it. I just sat with her. "Around 11, she said, into her mug. "If I fail this, I don't want a speech." "You won't get one," I said. "If you fail it, we'll drive to Delgado's and buy something that's between houses, and you'll take it in December instead, and I'll do the long division the whole time. There's no version of this where I go anywhere. I already told you. I don't leave things that still run." She leaned her head on my shoulder. First time. The cornflower mug and the diner mug sat on the tailgate, steaming into the cold. Not matching, never going to match, and I thought that was about the truest picture of two people I'd ever seen. She passed. I wasn't there when she found out. She took the test 2 counties over and drove home alone, the way she'd done everything alone for 2 years, and I was asleep after a shift when it happened. What woke me was my own doorbell at 2 in the afternoon, ringing over and over with the specific gravity of a 9-year-old leaning on it with his whole body. I came down and opened the door, and Milo was standing there holding a piece of paper and a roll of tape, breathing hard from running 2 doors down, and behind him at the end of the driveway, Meredith stood by her car with both hands pressed over her mouth and her eyes wrecked and shining. "She passed," Milo said. "She passed the test. Dean, she passed." And then, with the enormous seriousness of a boy completing an assignment he'd assigned himself, he walked past me into my kitchen and he took the paper, a printout, result, pass, her full legal name across the top, Meredith Ann Cole, and he taped it to my refrigerator. Squared it up, checked it with his plastic level, the one with the painted bubble which he'd brought for exactly this, and pronounced it, in his father's old word, level. Then he stepped back and looked at it on my fridge, like a man hanging a thing in its permanent home, which, it turned out, it was. That certificate is still on my refrigerator. We had it framed eventually, but Milo asked us to put it back exactly where he'd taped it. So we did, frame and all, held on with a magnet now instead of tape, but in the same square he leveled. Meredith came up the driveway slow, past the stump, and stood in my doorway where the rain used to come off the carport, and she didn't say anything clever and neither did I. She just looked at the paper on my fridge with her son standing under it, and then she looked at me and she said, "I did it in the light. I did it with the lamp on." "I know," I said. "I saw the whole thing, on purpose." We got married 11 months later, in the spring, in the shared driveway on Cedar Court, right where the maple came down. We found no nicer venue and I've never once regretted it. We stood on the seam of concrete between the 2 units, hers and mine, though by then the words had stopped meaning 2 different things, and the whole cul-de-sac came, even Ron, even Deb, who cried and who I have since forgiven, mostly. The generator I'd regrounded ran the sound system, grounded better than half the street, exactly like I'd promised the chat a year and a half before. Milo was the ring bearer and carried them out on his plastic drill, laid across the head of it like a tray, and the drill made its bicycle spoke sound the whole way up the aisle and nobody minded. And we kept the stump. I never did rent that grinder. I planed the top flat and sanded it smooth and rubbed oil into the raw maple until the grain came up gold, and I set it low into the grass on a bed of gravel so it wouldn't rock. And it is a bench now, in the strip between our units where a windstorm once dropped a tree and killed the power to two lonely houses, and forced two people who'd have otherwise died strangers to stand on either side of the wreck and drink coffee. Meredith wears scrubs to work now. She's a floor nurse at the county hospital, on nights, same as me, which means some mornings we get home at the same gray hour and sit on the maple bench with the two mugs, the diner one and the cornflower one, still cracked. I glued the crack, but you can see it, and I'm glad you can, and we don't say much, because we're two people who never needed the other one to talk. The cul-de-sac tells the story now like they always knew, like they saw it coming. Deb Marchetti tells new neighbors that the Halversons got together because of the big windstorm, the famous one, and she's not wrong, but she leaves out the part where the whole street had already decided who Meredith was and got every letter of it wrong. I don't correct her anymore. I know the real version. I know the woman they called stuck-up was just standing very still, holding a load nobody offered to take, and that all it took was one man awake at the wrong hour of the day, and one bad connection sparking in the dark, and a tree falling exactly where it needed to fall. So here's the only thing I'll leave you with, since I've never been much for speeches. The next time your street decides somebody's cold, the one with the half-drawn curtains, the one who never comes to the thing, the one everybody's quietly waiting to watch crack, go shut off the thing that's about to hurt her. Don't wait to be asked. She's not cold. She's grounded. It's just that nobody's stood close enough to feel the current she's carrying. The lamp's already on. It's always been on. Somebody just has to be there with it when you finally stop doing everything in the dark.